I've built 5 of these sort of lightweight long bows using hickory for 5 grandkids. Realized that I'd made them all right-handed, and here I am needing a left-handed bow, so I'm going to make another one and make this video out of it. The bows are made of hickory, basically a slab of hickory 1/4 of an inch thick, and another block that becomes the area for the handle. And then I used just the same bowstring making material that any bow would use, and make strings for these. These are light bows, light as far as pulling strength or pulling weight, because the hickory is so thin. These come out at around, I don't know, between 18 and 20 pounds of pull. And here's my ultra unscientific method of testing that. I just set this on a scale and pull it back to the full length, and this bow that I'm replacing or showing you here is at about 16 pounds. So it's super light, but it's just a 6-year-old that's using it. So I began with just a 1x6 of hickory, about 3/4 of an inch thick and 5.5 inches wide. I rip it down to 1.5 inches, just a hair over 1.5 inches, because I'm going to be doing some shaping of the handle, and it's going to end up being a little bit narrower. I want to end up with 1.5 inches of width. So I rip it that way, then I rip it this way. I'm going to get 2 slabs out of this piece of this 1x6. So I will be able to, if I would like, make a future bow. You see that I'm getting these down to more closer to, I would say, about 3/8 of an inch in thickness. And once I've gotten them to that shape, I will take them to the planer and bring them the rest of the way down to just a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, because there's still going to be some sanding going on, etc. And if you take them down too thin, they get so weak that they are, I think, too weak to be practical. So I just kept making passes through the planer and testing my depth as I went until I was just a little bit thicker than 1/4 of an inch, maybe a 64th thicker. Then I mark them. If you find the center of the slab is 60 inches long, 5 feet. Find the center, and then mark a 7.5 inch center section on, using the center, centering the 7.5 inch section, because that is where the block will be glued on for the handle, and you'll see later how that area gets shaped. So the bows start out basically at the handle at 1.5 inches, and by the time they get out to the end of the bow, out here where you cut the grooves for the bow string to ride in, the bow will be 1/2 inch. So you're going to be tapering this 1.5 inch center section down to 1/2 inch at each end of the bow. And the way I do that is with a tapering jig, same jig I would use to taper a table leg. Just clamping it, kind of a homemade jig. I just clamp the bow slab on the edge of this piece of plywood so that the blade basically zeroes out at the 7.5 inch wide handle area and comes down to 1/2 inch end. And here's the other side of that taper, and you can see it works really well. Now, as for the block where the handle goes, that also needs a couple of tapers. I used just the same jig to do that, to make a taper here. You could glue this block on square, but then you'd really have a lot of chopping to do to get it down, and so this is a lot faster. And so once I've done that, I simply glue that block to the slab and let that dry overnight. And that area, that 7.5-inch center, is going to be where most of the work takes place, because it needs to be shaped in basically all four directions. It's going to become the handle, it's going to become the notch, the arrow rest. It's going to become the strong part of the bow that doesn't give when you're pulling on it. And so the block and its position in the center of the bow is pretty important. So you're going to see that once you've sort of hollowed the sides of that block section for the handle, the part of the bow that bends starts out at 1.5 inches, and out at the end you're down to 1/2 inch. And that's what that looks like all glued up. So the next thing that needs to be done now is the shaping of this handle area. And again, it's where most of the time is taken. There's just a little quick drawing of what the end looks like. And here's the center section, 7.5 inches wide. And this block is simply glued to that center section, and it will become the area where all the carving takes place to create a handle. Once I've made these handles, as far as the shape is concerned, I've usually just wrapped them in some kind of cord or twine so that your hand has a little bit of a grip, and usually using hot glue to hold those pieces of twine in place. So that's what the handle looks like. Then you're going to carve down each side to make it a little bit thinner where your hand can grip it. And then you're going to cut a notch in it to be the arrow rest. And here's where I went wrong. I made all of these right-handed bows, and so I needed to make a bow with the notch on the other side. Here's just another quick look at that. Here's sort of the untouched block, here's the carved down block, and here's the block with the notch in it. Again, you're going to shape it and smooth it to make it round and comfortable for the hand. So here I am pulling it out of the clamps now to get ready to start shaping it. And I'll just kind of give you an idea of how I go about shaping that handle. I start by removing as much wood as fast as I can using a router on each side, left and right, of the handle to get it down to a depth that's pretty close to where the handle will end up. Once I've done that, I use chisels and rasps and sanders. So this is just a straight router bit that I've set to perhaps 3/8 of an inch depth to take this handle down to get, I guess, most of the depth taken out the quickest way possible. And you could do this a number of ways. I've done this before where I've just set this bow in my table saw sled and adjusted the blade to a shallow depth and just made a whole bunch of cuts across it to hollow it out, like making a giant dado groove in it. But the router was quicker, and honestly, it kind of doesn't matter how rough you are with it, because you're going to end up chiseling and sanding and rasping, and then even then, when it's all said and done, you're going to cover the handle with twine of some kind to make a grip out of it. And so this doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to remove the wood and get it out of the way for later work. So I'll speed this up because it's not rocket science. You're just basically wanting to narrow the handle, and this removes more wood more quickly than just about any other method. Then once I've got that, I want to taper now. I want to, from where that block starts, That's where the bow is still at 1.5 inches, and you're going to taper that now back down towards the thickness of the handle, which is going to be almost 3/4 of an inch thinner than the whole bow. You're taking about 3/8 inch off of each side of the handle, so you end up with a handle in the middle that's about 3/4 of an inch wide. And so the quickest way to do this is with a chisel, and then once you get pretty close, I started with some heavy paper 80 grit and worked down through 220 so that it would be ready for finishing once I'd gotten the shape that was going to be pleasing. Then you have to cut the notch, and so I just used a square here to give me a straight line and line this 90 degrees with the handle, something I could eyeball my saw up against. I cut in to this handle, and I know it seems like you're weakening the bow by cutting the thickest part of the bow, but you're only going to go in 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8. I know it seems like a lot, but you're kind of at where the bow is at its strongest. And again, I've made a lot of these, and there's never been an issue with the notch. So I just use this Japanese saw to get as neat a cut as I could get. I have another Japanese saw that I cut the other angle with, and then I smoothed and shaped that with rasps. Then here's the back side of the handle. I want that to be almost round, and I found the best way to round that out is just to use a little block plane and just slowly take that down until you're happy with the shape, that it's round, because that's going to fit in the cup of your hand, and you want that to be relatively round and smooth and easy to hold on to. So I think a block plane works perfect for this. You're working with the grain, and it didn't take long to get a nice rounded edge, and you'll see in a minute. You'll see the whole handle in a minute, and it comes out pretty round and pretty nice looking. You could do this with a roundover bit on the router, and I think I've done that before on a bow, but this seemed a lot easier and a little more control. Then up at the end of each of the bow, up at the 1/2 inch end where the string goes, you need a groove on both sides of the bow at a 45-degree angle. And I found the best way to cut that groove is to use the file that you use to sharpen a chainsaw. So here's my sculpted handle, unwrapped, but you get an idea what that looks like. Then I went on to the string. The string I used the kind of string you use when you make a bow. I think I've got 10 strands, so I went around 10 times, 5 in the green, 5 in the yellow, and I did the continuous loop type of a bowstring using this red colored serving string to serve the bow. Got this little kind of a cheapo server, but it works great. You just roll this around and tie the knots at the end, and I didn't do a fabulous job with the string, but plenty good, and works like a charm now that it's done. And so this just kind of gives you an idea of how that server works. If you've never seen that done before, it's just basically wrapping a finer thread around the multi-stranded bowstring. And so I do that in the middle of the string where you knock the arrow, and at each end I make a loop. And so here's the final bow. I haven't tied off the twine yet at the handle, but you can see the bowstrings on each end. And here's my ultra scientific test of its strength, and this one ended up being more like about 21 pounds, which will be just fine. 20, yeah, almost 22 pounds of pull, just right. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and if so, please subscribe, and thank you for watching.